A mother's life taken by her own daughter, a brutal murder sparked by years of emotional turmoil. What drives a teenager to kill the very person who gave them life? And what leads them to take that violent step towards tragedy? This is the chilling reality that we explore in today's episode. In our journey through the cases we'll cover today, the one question that lingers in the air is, how can someone so young become capable of such devastation? From carefully planned attacks to moments of rage, these stories are as complex as they are heartbreaking. Today we will look at the stories of 10 teenagers, individuals who at one point might have seemed like ordinary youths, but whose decisions took them down a dark path with devastating consequences. These 10 teenagers didn't just make mistakes, they made choices that changed lives forever. From a teenager plotting an act of terrorism in the UK to a high school girl involved in a deadly spree, each case exposes deep layers of mental strain, violent decisions, and the events leading to irreversible consequences. We'll examine their lives leading up to the moment of crime, the trials that followed, and the shocking aftermath that left communities reeling. Safa Bular, an 18-year-old from Vauxhall, London, entered the annals of UK criminal history as the youngest woman convicted for plotting an Islamic State-inspired terror attack. Her journey into extremism began long before she became a household name in the media. At just 15 years old, Safa's life was marked by a growing fascination with radical ideologies. Her radicalization was not born in isolation. It was shaped by the influences around her, specifically her mother, Mina Dick, and her elder sister, Rislaine Bular. Both had shown signs of radicalization, creating an environment that was fertile ground for extremist beliefs to take root. But it wasn't just her family. The internet also played a major role. Through social media, Safa made a connection with 30-year-old Ned Hussein, a British fighter with the Islamic State, who would become a crucial figure in her descent into terrorism. Their relationship blossomed online, with Safa absorbing a radicalizing narrative that glorified violence and jihad. By the time she was 18, Safa had crossed a dangerous threshold. What started as an interest in jihadist material evolved into a full-fledged desire to join the Islamic State in Syria. However, the UK authorities had already taken notice of her activities. In a rare stroke of intervention, they acted to prevent her travel to Syria by confiscating her passport, a move that would eventually shift her focus from travel to a more localized plan of violence. Once blocked from joining the Islamic State in Syria, Safa's next move was chilling. Instead of abandoning her commitment to radical action, she began to shift her focus. Safa attempted to plan a terror attack on UK soil, with the British Museum in central London as her primary target. Her plot took shape as she began conducting reconnaissance, aided by her sister and mother. Together, the three women scouted potential sites for the attack, marking locations and making preparations for what they believed would be a devastating strike. Mina and Rislaine's active participation in this dark mission marked the first known instance of an all-female terror plot in the UK. The trio's plan was outlined in a disturbing mix of coded language, Mad Hatter's Tea Party for the attack itself, and cakes for the weapons. They were preparing to execute a deadly assault, but they were unaware that they were being closely monitored by the authorities. As Safa and her family prepared to carry out the attack, the authorities, who had already been monitoring her movements, intercepted their communications. Surveillance was ramped up, and soon they discovered the full extent of the plot. Safa, still in the grip of her radicalization, was far from remorseful. In fact, she continued to communicate her plans, believing her mission to be one of righteousness. Even after the death of her IS recruiter, Ned Hussein, in a drone strike, Safa remained resolute. She pledged to continue his work, unaware that the authorities were now closely watching her every move. In 2017, Safa was arrested for a travel-related offense, an arrest that would soon lead to the discovery of her plans to kill at the British Museum. During her time in custody, she continued her plotting, but now she was in the grip of an even more dangerous conviction. Her mission was unfinished, and the authorities could not stop her. When Safa's trial concluded, it was clear that her life would be defined by the violent path she had chosen. She was convicted of preparing acts of terrorism, both for attempting to join the Islamic State and for plotting the London attack. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 13 years. This meant that, at the earliest, Safa would be eligible for release when she reached 31 years old. Still a young woman with the potential to pose a serious threat if her radical views remained unchallenged. Looking back at Safa's life, it's difficult not to wonder, could this have been prevented? The influence of her family, the internet, and the social pressures she faced all converged to shape her radical views. Perhaps early intervention, better support systems, or a different social environment might have prevented Safa from choosing a path of violence. Her case serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of radicalization in young people and the urgent need for intervention to prevent other young individuals from walking the same path. Ashley Martinson, a 17-year-old from Peel, Wisconsin, made headlines for a brutal crime that shocked her small community. After enduring years of physical and emotional abuse, Ashley brutally murdered her stepfather, Thomas Ace, and her mother, Jennifer Ace, in a fit of anger and despair. Raised in an environment marked by violence and neglect, Ashley's story is one of profound trauma, a young girl pushed to the edge by a toxic and abusive home life. Her relationship with her stepfather, Thomas, was marked by constant tension and physical abuse. He was controlling and violent, often using Ashley's rebelliousness as an excuse to lash out. Her mother, Jennifer, failed to protect her from Thomas's cruelty, and instead of intervening, she became an accomplice in Ashley's suffering. This constant neglect from both parents built up in Ashley, resulting in a young woman unable to cope with the emotional strain. By the time Ashley was 17, she had become overwhelmed by the years of abuse and isolation. It was on March 7, 2015 that her emotions boiled over and erupted into violence, leaving a trail of destruction that would forever change her life. On the morning of March 7, 2015, a confrontation occurred between Ashley and her stepfather, Thomas. According to court documents, Thomas had taken Ashley's car keys and cell phone, infuriating her. The situation escalated quickly. In a blind rage, Ashley retrieved a firearm from the home and shot Thomas twice, once in the neck and once in the head, killing him instantly. After the shooting, Ashley fled to the bathroom, locking herself in as her mother, Jennifer, tried to get in. Instead of offering comfort or help, Jennifer was met with Ashley's violent anger. In the ensuing chaos, Ashley attacked her mother with a knife, stabbing her more than 30 times. Despite her mother's pleas for mercy, Ashley's rage knew no bounds, and Jennifer eventually succumbed to her injuries. The younger siblings, aged 2, 8, and 9, were locked in a bedroom by Ashley, who ensured they were safe from the violence. After the murders, Ashley fled the house with her 22-year-old boyfriend, Ryan Sisko, leaving the crime scene behind. The couple drove toward Indiana, but the authorities were soon on their trail. Ashley's arrest came the following day in Boone County, Indiana, after her mother's car was flagged as stolen. Upon questioning, Ashley admitted to the murders of both her mother and stepfather, describing the killing spree in chilling detail. In her confession, she explained that her actions were driven by years of torment from Thomas and neglect from Jennifer, her mother. Her defense team argued that Ashley was a victim of prolonged domestic abuse, which had led to her violent outburst. They highlighted the psychological toll of years of physical and emotional harm, stating that Ashley had been trapped in a cycle of abuse with no way out. Prosecutors, however, presented evidence that the killings were premeditated. They pointed to Ashley's detailed planning, including writing a fictional story with violent fantasies, as proof that the murders were not spur of the moment, but the result of a simmering anger that had built up over time. In July 2016, Ashley entered a plea agreement, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide as part of a deal that allowed her to avoid life in prison. She was sentenced to 23 years in prison, followed by 17 years of extended supervision. The judge took into account Ashley's troubled upbringing, but the brutality of the crime still warranted a lengthy sentence. Her case raises difficult questions about the intersections of abuse, mental health, and crime. How much of Ashley's behavior can be attributed to the trauma she endured? Could intervention earlier in her life have prevented this tragedy? While the court recognized her abuse, it ultimately ruled that Ashley's actions were still beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior, despite her victimization. Looking at Ashley's story, it's clear that violence begets violence. And for some, the emotional toll of living in an abusive environment can become so overwhelming that it leads to irreversible consequences. Ashley's tragic decision to take the lives of the very people who had harmed her speaks to the complexities of abuse and the lasting impact it can have on young people who feel they have no other escape. Christina Lynn Atkins was just 13 years old when she took the life of her grandmother, Virginia Bentley, in 2006. Raised by Virginia after her mother abandoned her as a child, Christina's life had been one of profound instability and emotional pain. Virginia, who took Christina in, provided the only semblance of a stable home in Christina's early years. However, despite the care and love she received from her grandmother, Christina was emotionally scarred by the absence of her mother and the neglect she faced during her formative years. At the time of the crime, Christina was in a fragile emotional state. She had been struggling with a sense of abandonment and confusion over her mother's rejection. There were signs that Christina was grappling with severe emotional trauma, but these issues were not fully addressed by the adults in her life. This left her vulnerable to dangerous thoughts and behaviors. On the surface, Christina appeared to be a typical adolescent, but deep within, she was wrestling with a multitude of unresolved issues. The tragic events that unfolded in 2006 marked a turning point in Christina's life, a moment where her inner turmoil took a devastatingly dark turn. Christina's crime was both chilling and methodical. In 2006, Christina poisoned her grandmother by altering Virginia's medication. Taking morphine pills prescribed to her grandfather, Christina swapped them out with capsules containing her grandmother's prescribed medicine. Virginia ingested the altered medication, which led to her death from poisoning. At first, Virginia's death was not deemed suspicious, and no foul play was suspected. The initial cause of death was not immediately identified, as Christina had effectively disguised the poisoning. However, it wasn't until 2 years later, in 2008, when Christina confessed to the crime, that the full scope of her actions was revealed. Christina admitted to deliberately altering the medication, stating that she had poisoned her grandmother in a calculated act. This confession came after an extended period of psychological pressure, during which Christina had been forced to confront the horrific reality of what she had done. In the aftermath of Christina's confession, investigators launched a full investigation into her actions. It was soon revealed that Christina had been struggling with deep emotional trauma stemming from her abandonment by her mother and the emotional neglect she experienced. Growing up with this unresolved trauma played a significant role in her eventual decision to harm her grandmother. Christina's confession revealed that, while she had not planned the murder in advance, she had been consumed by the pain of her past and sought a way to escape the feelings of abandonment and rejection. As the investigation unfolded, psychologists and mental health professionals began to evaluate Christina's mental state. Her actions were analyzed in light of her troubled upbringing, and the case became a sobering example of the devastating effects that childhood trauma and abandonment can have on a young person. Experts pointed to the emotional and psychological impact of growing up in a dysfunctional environment and how these factors may have contributed to Christina's violent behavior. During her trial, Christina was charged with second-degree murder. The prosecution and defense alike grappled with the complexity of her upbringing and the emotional toll it had taken on her. The court had to consider not only the severity of Christina's crime, but also the psychological toll of her past. Christina was convicted of second-degree murder in 2009 and sentenced to 30 to 45 years in prison. The court's decision highlighted the seriousness of her actions, while also acknowledging the profound psychological damage she had suffered as a result of her early experiences with neglect and abandonment. Her case serves as a chilling reminder of the long-term effects of childhood trauma. Christina's violent act against the very person who had cared for her illustrates how unresolved emotional issues can manifest in destructive ways. In Christina's case, her actions were a tragic expression of deep emotional pain, one that could have perhaps been prevented with earlier intervention and support. Reflecting on Christina's story, it's clear that the absence of a stable family environment and the emotional neglect she experienced contributed significantly to her path of violence. Her case raises important questions about the need for mental health support for young people, particularly those who have experienced abandonment or abuse. Without proper emotional care and intervention, Vulnerable children like Christina may tragically resort to violence as a way of coping with their pain. Paris Mayo was just 15 years old when she committed an unimaginable act in her home in Herefordshire, England. A young girl still grappling with the pressures of adolescence, Paris faced a terrifying reality when she secretly gave birth to a son. Her story is one marked by confusion, isolation, and ultimately, a tragic decision that would forever alter her life and the lives of those around her. Paris's pregnancy had been concealed from everyone, including her family. At the time of the birth, she was living with her parents in a household that seemed outwardly stable. However, Paris had been battling personal struggles, including feelings of loneliness and emotional distress. She had not informed anyone about her pregnancy and had kept it hidden from her parents, school, and friends, all of whom were unaware of the secret she was carrying. When the time came to give birth, Paris did so alone, in silence, without the aid of medical assistance or support. What followed in the aftermath of the birth was equally disturbing. The newborn, a baby boy, was not given the chance to live. Instead of seeking help, Paris, in a state of extreme distress and isolation, took her son's life shortly after delivery. This act, carried out in secrecy, was an emotional reaction to an overwhelming situation that Paris was ill-prepared to handle. Her choice to act in such a way raised serious questions about the psychological toll her situation had on her. Paris's decision to give birth in secret and the actions that followed were both tragic and horrifying. On the night of March 23, 2019, Paris went into labor alone in the living room of her home. Her parents and brother were asleep upstairs, unaware of what was happening. Paris claimed in her later statements that she had been afraid of her parents' reaction, particularly her father's, who she described as a controlling figure. She said she didn't want to disappoint him and chose to keep the pregnancy a secret. After the baby was born, Paris reportedly did not make a sound, out of fear of waking her parents. When the baby was born, she did not immediately seek help, choosing instead to remain alone. In a horrifying turn of events, shortly after giving birth, Paris attacked her newborn son. The injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, and experts later suggested that the baby had suffered from crushing injuries. Paris then suffocated the child using cotton wool balls, an act that caused the baby's death. Afterward, Paris hid the body, attempting to conceal the crime from her family. The next day, her mother discovered the body of the infant. It was only then that the tragic events came to light, and Paris's mother immediately called emergency services. Paris initially denied any involvement, claiming that she had not known she was pregnant until just before the birth, and that the baby had died of natural causes. However, suspicions quickly arose, and her mother's discovery of marks on the baby's body and Paris's own contradictory statements eventually led to the investigation. The investigation into Paris's actions began when her mother reported her suspicions. Paris's behavior and the lack of medical assistance during the birth led investigators to question the circumstances surrounding the child's death. Paris was arrested, and the details of the crime slowly emerged. As the investigation unfolded, experts evaluated Paris's mental health, revealing that she had been struggling with depression and emotional turmoil, which had been exacerbated by the traumatic situation of becoming pregnant and keeping it a secret. During the trial, Paris's defense team argued that she was in a state of emotional distress and immaturity, claiming that her decision to kill her newborn son was driven by fear and confusion rather than premeditation. Her defense suggested that her emotional state had severely affected her judgment and that her actions were a result of being overwhelmed by a situation she was not equipped to handle. Paris's claim of emotional distress was met with mixed reactions in the courtroom, with some questioning whether the act was truly one of desperation or something more. Paris Mayo was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years before she would be eligible for parole. At the time of sentencing, the judge acknowledged her youth and the emotional toll her situation had taken on her. However, the brutality of her actions could not be ignored. Paris's case raised difficult questions about the intersection of mental health, teenage pregnancy, and the lack of support for young mothers. The issue of teenage pregnancy and the mental health challenges faced by young mothers is complex and multifaceted. Paris's crime highlights the dangers of a lack of guidance, support, and understanding for vulnerable young people who find themselves in difficult, life-altering situations. While some may argue that Paris's immaturity and emotional struggles should be taken into account, others may argue that her actions, though tragic, cannot be excused. Paris's story is one of pain, fear, and isolation, but it also serves as a warning. It shows the extreme lengths to which emotional distress can lead when proper support systems are not in place. With her sentencing, Paris will have the chance to reflect on her actions and hopefully receive the treatment she needs. However, her case serves as a broader reminder that early intervention, counseling, and mental health support for young people in distress are critical in preventing such tragedies from occurring. Jaime Sylvan was just 14 years old when she became involved in the brutal murder of her mother, Cheryl Sylvan, in Pennsylvania. Alongside her 20-year-old boyfriend, Caleb Barnes, Jaime played a chilling role in orchestrating the death of the woman who had brought her into the world. Raised in a home marked by dysfunction and domestic violence, Jaime's life had been far from normal. Her relationship with Caleb Barnes, an older man, further deepened her emotional isolation and exposed her to a dangerous world that would ultimately lead to violence. Jaime's troubled upbringing was complicated by years of exposure to instability and abuse. Her mother, Cheryl, had her own struggles and was unable to provide the support Jaime needed. Instead of protection, Jaime was exposed to manipulation and unhealthy dynamics, which became especially evident through her relationship with Caleb. Caleb, who was significantly older, had a controlling influence over Jaime, making her emotionally dependent on him, which ultimately led her down a path of violence. The murder of Cheryl Sylvan was not a crime of passion or momentary anger. It was a planned, premeditated act that stemmed from a combination of emotional manipulation and a troubled home life. Jaime's involvement in the crime left an indelible mark on her, raising questions about the influence of abusive relationships and the vulnerability of young girls. The details of Jaime's involvement in the murder of her mother are both chilling and deeply disturbing. On the evening of March 15, 2015, Jaime and Caleb lured her mother into a trap. Jaime, who had been living with Caleb at the time, invited her mother to their home. Under the guise of reconciling, Jaime manipulated her mother into coming to the house, where Caleb was waiting. The crime that followed was both brutal and methodical. Once Cheryl entered the home, Caleb attacked her, using a knife to stab her multiple times. Jaime, though not the one to physically carry out the murder, played an active role in the events leading up to it. She assisted Caleb by restraining her mother, contributing to the horror of the crime. After Cheryl was murdered, the two moved her body to a nearby wooded area, attempting to conceal the evidence. The crime was premeditated, with evidence of planning in the form of text messages and a recorded conversation in which Jaime had encouraged Caleb to kill her mother. The severity of the violence used in the murder and the cold-blooded nature of the crime left investigators shocked. The psychological toll on Jaime, who had been groomed by Caleb and raised in a violent environment, played a central role in her involvement. After the murder, Jaime and Caleb went to great lengths to cover up the crime. However, it didn't take long for investigators to piece together the circumstances of Cheryl's death. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic evidence all pointed back to Jaime and Caleb. During questioning, Jaime eventually confessed to her role in the murder, admitting that she had lured her mother into the house and played a part in restraining her while Caleb attacked her. The court was faced with the difficult task of weighing Jaime's age against the severity of her involvement in the crime. At just 14 years old, she was still a child, yet she had committed an unforgivable act of violence. Her defense argued that Jaime had been manipulated by Caleb, who had exerted a controlling influence over her, and that her youth and lack of maturity should be taken into account. The debate surrounding Jaime's manipulation by Caleb was central to the trial. The prosecution, however, emphasized that Jaime had willingly played a significant role in the planning and execution of her mother's murder. While the defense suggested that Jaime's abusive upbringing and relationship with Caleb made her susceptible to influence, the court had to balance these factors with the gravity of the crime. In 2017, Jaime Sylvan was sentenced to 35 years to life in prison for her involvement in the murder of her mother. As part of a plea agreement, she agreed to testify against Caleb Barnes, who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing was a stark reminder of the harsh consequences of violence, but it also shed light on the complexities of domestic abuse and how it can influence young people in profound ways. Jaime's story raises critical questions about the vulnerability of young girls to older men and the damaging effects of abusive relationships. The impact of her turbulent upbringing, compounded by her emotional manipulation by Caleb, highlights the dangers of young people becoming involved with individuals who exert control over them. While Jaime's actions were reprehensible, they were also the result of years of emotional abuse and a lack of appropriate support. Jaime's case serves as a tragic reminder of the importance of early intervention in abusive households and the need for strong support systems for vulnerable children. Her story is one of pain, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of being caught in a toxic relationship. Trinity Shockley, an 18-year-old girl from Mooresville, Indiana, became the center of a chilling plot that brought her to the brink of committing an act of violence at her high school. With a plan in place for a school shooting that could have mirrored other tragic incidents in recent history, Trinity's story is a sobering reminder of the psychological and emotional factors that can push a vulnerable individual towards such destructive decisions. Trinity had been struggling with personal crises in the months leading up to the plot. She had recently lost her mother and had been involved in a car accident, which resulted in serious emotional distress. Reports indicate that these life events had a profound impact on her mental state, fueling feelings of isolation and despair. These issues, combined with her fascination with mass shootings and troubled thoughts, created a dangerous cocktail of emotions and motivations that led to the planning of a deadly attack on her school. Despite her age, Trinity's case reflects the deep-seated psychological issues that can affect young individuals, often leading to tragic outcomes. It's a stark reminder that high school students, particularly those dealing with personal trauma, may carry out violent acts if not given the necessary intervention and support. Trinity Shockley's plot was set to unfold on February 14, 2025, ironically the anniversary of the Parkland school shooting in Florida. Over the course of more than a year, Trinity had been planning the attack, communicating her intentions to others online, and actively gathering the tools needed to carry out the shooting. Through Discord, Trinity shared her plans and expressed admiration for the perpetrators of past school shootings, including the infamous Nicholas Cruz from Parkland. She also revealed her desire to replicate the violence that had already scarred the nation. Authorities were alerted to Trinity's plan through an anonymous tip submitted to the Sandy Hook Promises Say Something tip line. The tipster provided critical information, including references to Trinity's online threats and her admiration for previous mass shooters. The FBI traced the messages back to Trinity's IP address, initiating a swift investigation that ultimately led law enforcement to intervene before the attack could take place. As authorities dug deeper into Trinity's online communications, they uncovered disturbing evidence of her intentions. They found notebooks filled with writings about mass shootings, including a statement that read, "I cannot stop thinking about Nicholas. I love you, Nicholas." Investigators also found a disturbing collage of notorious mass shooters in Trinity's room and several items typically associated with such violent acts, including bulletproof vests and magazines for firearms. Trinity's obsession with violence was more than just a passing interest. It was the core of her troubled state of mind in the months leading up to the planned attack. Once law enforcement had gathered enough evidence to confirm Trinity's intentions, they took swift action. On February 11, 2025, police executed a search warrant at Trinity's residence and seized numerous items, including notebooks containing her thoughts on mass shootings, disturbing photos, and the materials she had gathered for the planned attack. These findings, combined with her online communications, made it clear that Trinity had every intention of carrying out a deadly assault on her school. Trinity was arrested without incident and taken into custody. She faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit intimidation, and 2 terrorism-related offenses. As her trial unfolded, the court was forced to confront the psychological underpinnings of her actions: her grief over the loss of her mother, her emotional breakdown following the car accident, and her obsession with mass shootings. Experts evaluated her mental state and determined that, although Trinity had planned the attack meticulously, her emotional turmoil played a significant role in her actions. Her arrest and subsequent charges underscored the severity of her actions and the immediate threat she posed to her school and community. However, it also opened a conversation about the vulnerability of young people in distress, especially those who might seek to lash out violently due to feelings of despair or alienation. As of May 2025, Trinity Shockley remains in custody at the Morgan County Jail, awaiting trial. She faces a range of serious charges that could result in decades of imprisonment if convicted on all counts. However, what's perhaps more disturbing than the crime itself is the question of what could have been done to prevent it. Trinity's case brings to the forefront the psychological factors contributing to violent behavior, particularly in adolescence. Her deep emotional pain, compounded by the trauma of losing her mother and the guilt she felt following the car accident, were significant factors in her decision to plan a school shooting. It's clear that Trinity needed emotional support and intervention far earlier than she received. Her case serves as a reminder of the importance of mental health care for young people, especially those dealing with grief, trauma, and other emotional challenges. Furthermore, Trinity's case also underscores the dangers of the internet in shaping young minds, particularly those in emotional distress. Her online connections with others who shared violent ideologies, coupled with the access to dangerous material, created a toxic environment that fueled her desire for violence. Ultimately, Trinity Shockley's story is a reflection on the larger societal issues of teenage mental health, the risks posed by unresolved trauma, and the urgent need for early intervention to prevent future tragedies. By addressing the emotional struggles of vulnerable youth before they escalate, it's possible to prevent similar crimes from occurring. At just 15 years old, Maricela Nicolasa Diaz became involved in one of the most brutal murders in rural South Dakota. Alongside her 19-year-old boyfriend, Alexander Salgado, Maricela played a key role in the tragic death of 16-year-old Jasmine Guevara. What made this case even more disturbing was the premeditated nature of the crime, the manipulation that Maricela experienced from her older boyfriend, and the tragic circumstances that led to her participation in such an atrocious act. Maricela's story is a complicated one. Having met Salgado when she was just 13, their relationship was marked by abuse, manipulation, and emotional control. Salgado had a history of violence and was heavily involved in Maricela's life, guiding many of her decisions. Despite attempts from Child Protective Services to intervene in their relationship due to the abuse, Maricela continued to see Salgado and eventually became pregnant by him in July 2009. Their troubled relationship and Maricela's lack of support systems set the stage for the tragic events that unfolded later in 2009. The murder of Jasmine Guevara was rooted in jealousy and suspicion. Maricela had become convinced that Jasmine and Salgado were having an affair, which fueled her anger and resentment. This jealousy ultimately led her to plot and carry out a gruesome act that would change her life, and Jasmine's, forever. On the morning of November 10, 2009, Maricela Diaz and her boyfriend, Alexander Salgado, lured 16-year-old Jasmine Guevara to a remote area outside of town. Maricela had asked Jasmine for a ride to Walmart under the pretense of buying supplies for a bonfire or cookout, which was an outright lie. Jasmine, unsuspecting of the danger ahead, agreed to help. Once they arrived at the secluded location, the couple ambushed Jasmine. Salgado and Diaz attacked her with knives, stabbing her multiple times. The brutality of the assault was shocking, with both attackers inflicting vicious wounds. After the brutal stabbing, they placed Jasmine's body in the trunk of her car and set it on fire using lighter fluid that they had bought earlier. The fire was meant to destroy evidence, but instead it left a clear trail for investigators to follow. The fire quickly spread, and soon the body was discovered by authorities, who responded to reports of a vehicle fire. The extent of the injuries and the condition of Jasmine's body pointed to a violent, premeditated murder. The motive, investigators would later learn, was a toxic mixture of jealousy, suspicion, and control. Emotions manipulated by Salgado, who had influenced Maricela into carrying out the murder. After the discovery of Jasmine's body, investigators worked tirelessly to connect the dots and figure out who was responsible for the crime. Evidence soon pointed toward Maricela and Salgado, and the authorities began to piece together the story of the murder. Through phone records and interviews, they uncovered the details of how Maricela had lured Jasmine to her death under false pretenses. and how the couple had planned the murder together. Maricela was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. During the investigation, it became clear that Maricela had been deeply influenced by her older boyfriend, Alexander Salgado, who had a controlling and abusive hold over her. Maricela's defense team argued that she had been manipulated by Salgado and that her youth and lack of emotional maturity made her vulnerable to his coercive tactics. The prosecution, however, presented a compelling case showing that Maricela had actively participated in the murder, choosing to assist in the brutal killing. Despite her age, the prosecution argued that Maricela understood the gravity of her actions and should be held accountable for her role in the crime. In January 2015, Maricela Nicolasa Diaz was convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The court sentenced her to 80 years in prison, a sentence that reflected the severity of her crime, but also her age at the time. Given her role in the murder and the brutal nature of the crime, the court took a firm stance on holding her accountable, despite the fact that she was a minor at the time. Maricela's case highlights the impact of abusive relationships in emotional manipulation, particularly when a young person is involved with an older, controlling partner. The dynamic between Maricela and Salgado was central to the crime. Salgado's influence over her played a significant role in her decision to participate in the murder, showcasing how manipulation can lead young people to make devastating choices. Maricela's story is a tragic reminder of the dangers of abusive relationships and the vulnerability of young minds in such situations. It raises important questions about the role of support systems for teenagers in abusive relationships and the need for early intervention to prevent further violence. While Maricela's actions were heinous, it is clear that her manipulation by Salgado contributed to the crime in ways that cannot be ignored. Reflecting on this case, we are reminded of the importance of educating young people about healthy relationships, recognizing the signs of manipulation, and providing them with the resources they need to escape abusive situations. Only by addressing these issues can we hope to prevent more tragedies like the one that ended Jasmine Guevara's life. Megan Dakota Grunwald, a 17-year-old girl from Utah, found herself caught up in a deadly crime spree that led to the tragic death of Sheriff Corey Ride and left Deputy Greg Sherwood severely injured. What started as a seemingly innocent road trip turned into a violent, high-speed chase across multiple counties, culminating in the murder of a law enforcement officer. Megan's involvement in the crime was both chilling and disturbing, as it highlighted not only her role in the violence, but also the deep emotional turmoil she was experiencing at the time. Megan had been in a tumultuous relationship with her 27-year-old boyfriend, Jose Angel Garcia Jorge, who played a significant role in influencing her actions. Their relationship was marked by instability, and Megan's involvement in the crime was closely tied to the influence Garcia Jorge had over her. The couple's troubled history and their increasingly erratic behavior eventually led to the tragic events that unfolded in January 2014. Megan's story is one of manipulation, impulsive violence, and the consequences of a toxic relationship. On January 30th, 2014, Megan and her boyfriend, Garcia Jorge, embarked on a deadly crime spree that began with the shooting of Utah County Sheriff Corey Ride. The couple had been driving in a pickup truck when they were stopped by Sheriff Ride, who believed the vehicle was disabled and stopped to offer assistance. Once Sheriff Ride approached their truck, Garcia Jorge opened fire, shooting him up to 7 times. Ride collapsed, left in a pool of his own blood, and ultimately died from his injuries. After shooting Sheriff Ride, Megan and Garcia Jorge sped away, leading law enforcement on a high-speed chase across multiple counties. The pursuit was intense, with the couple evading capture for several hours. During the chase, Garcia Jorge shot and injured Deputy Greg Sherwood, further escalating the violence. Despite the high-speed chase and the dangerous actions of the couple, they were eventually apprehended in San Pete County. Megan and Garcia Jorge were arrested and taken into custody. Megan's involvement in the fatal shooting of Sheriff Ride and the subsequent injuries to Deputy Sherwood shocked the community. The violence of the crimes and the fact that a young woman like Megan was involved raised many questions about the underlying causes of her actions. Once Megan and Garcia Jorge were apprehended, law enforcement launched a thorough investigation into the crime spree. The evidence gathered painted a clear picture of the couple's actions, and it quickly became evident that Megan had been an active participant in the violence. During her arrest, Megan initially appeared somewhat detached from the gravity of the situation, showing little remorse for her involvement in the murder of Sheriff Ryde. Megan's trial was widely covered in the media, drawing attention to her youth and the complexities of her involvement in the crimes. Her defense team argued that she had been heavily influenced by her older boyfriend, Garcia Yorgi, who had a history of criminal behavior and had played a significant role in her decision to participate in the shooting. They claimed that Megan had been manipulated by Garcia Yorgi and that her actions were not entirely her own. The prosecution, on the other hand, presented evidence that Megan had willingly participated in the crime and had been complicit in the shooting. They argued that, despite her age, she was fully aware of the consequences of her actions and should be held accountable for her role in the murder of Sheriff Ryde and the injuries to Deputy Sherwood. In 2015, Megan was convicted on multiple charges, including aggravated murder, attempted murder, and aggravated assault on a police officer. She was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, after the Utah Supreme Court overturned her aggravated murder conviction in 2020 due to errors in jury instructions, she accepted a plea deal in 2021, pleading guilty to manslaughter and aggravated assault. Megan's sentencing to 2 consecutive terms of 1 to 15 years, with a maximum possible prison term of 30 years, reflects the gravity of her crimes. The sentence, though significant, highlights the complexity of Megan's involvement. Despite the plea deal, the public remained divided over her role in the crime. Many argued that Megan's youth and her relationship with Garcia Yorgi played a significant role in the violence, while others felt that she should have been held more accountable for the loss of life. Megan's case raises important questions about the influence of relationships on young people, particularly when they involve an older, more manipulative partner. Her involvement in the crime spree was largely shaped by her relationship with Garcia Yorgi, whose criminal history and coercive influence over her were central to her actions. Megan's story is a tragic reminder of the dangers of toxic relationships, especially when they involve emotional manipulation and a lack of support systems for young individuals. Reflecting on Megan's case, it's clear that early intervention, mental health support, and positive role models are essential in preventing young people from being drawn into violent situations. Megan's story also underscores the importance of recognizing the role of influence, especially from older individuals, in shaping the behavior of teenagers. By addressing these issues before they escalate, we can hope to prevent more tragedies from unfolding. Morgan E. Geyser, at the tender age of 12, was involved in a chilling crime that captivated national attention. Alongside her friend Anna Weiler, Morgan brutally attacked their friend Peyton Leutner in a wooded area near Waukesha, Wisconsin. The motivation behind the crime, as disturbing as it was, stemmed from the belief that they needed to appease the fictional character known as Slender Man, a figure spawned from internet folklore. Morgan's story is a tragic example of how vulnerable youth can be manipulated by online myths, leading to violent and devastating outcomes. Morgan and Anna were close friends, but their bond was tainted by a shared obsession with Slender Man, a fictional character that had emerged from internet meme culture. The mythology surrounding Slender Man painted him as a malevolent figure who stalked and manipulated children, and in Morgan's fragile mental state, this belief became all-consuming. Tragically, Morgan's fascination with the myth, combined with an undiagnosed mental illness, led her to orchestrate the violent attack on Peyton Leutner. Despite her young age, Morgan's actions were premeditated and deliberate, showing the power of delusions and the influence of internet culture on impressionable minds. On May 31, 2014, Morgan and Anna invited their friend Peyton Leutner to a sleepover in Waukesha, Wisconsin. The trio spent the night playing games and bonding, but what Peyton did not know was that Morgan and Anna had already planned her brutal attack. Their motive, as they later explained, was to prove themselves worthy of Slender Man, a figure they believed would hurt their families if they did not act to please him. The attack occurred the next morning, when the girls lured Peyton into the woods under the pretense of playing a game. Once in a secluded area, Morgan and Anna viciously stabbed Peyton 19 times with a kitchen knife. Peyton, though gravely injured, managed to crawl to a nearby road where cyclists found her and called for help. Remarkably, Peyton survived the attack, though her injuries were life-threatening. and she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Morgan and Anna left Peyton to die, but their plans were thwarted when Peyton's survival instincts and the intervention of a Good Samaritan led to her rescue. The girls walked away from the scene, convinced that they had pleased Slender Man. They were eventually apprehended when police tracked them down later that day. The investigation into Morgan's actions revealed a shocking level of psychological distress. It quickly became apparent that Morgan's mental health played a central role in the crime. During the investigation, it was revealed that Morgan had been suffering from early-onset schizophrenia, a condition that had likely influenced her delusional belief in Slender Man. Morgan's defense team argued that she was not fully responsible for her actions due to her mental illness, presenting evidence that she was suffering from severe psychological disturbances at the time of the attack. The trial was a complex legal process, as the court had to grapple with the question of Morgan's culpability given her young age and mental condition. The prosecution argued that Morgan had planned the attack, and although her mental illness may have influenced her decisions, she was still responsible for her actions. The defense, however, emphasized the role of her schizophrenia, which made her believe that committing murder was the only way to satisfy the demands of Slender Man. Ultimately, the court found Morgan not guilty by reason of mental illness and sentenced her to a mental health institution rather than a traditional prison sentence. This decision reflected both the severity of her crime and the recognition that her actions were driven by a significant psychiatric disorder. As of May 2025, Morgan remains in a mental health institution, receiving treatment for her schizophrenia. She has been diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia, a condition that may have been exacerbated by her exposure to disturbing internet content at a vulnerable age. Morgan's case raises important questions about the role of mental illness in violent crimes and the influence of internet mythology on young minds. While she has been receiving treatment in the institution, Morgan's eventual release remains uncertain. The court ruled that she would remain in the institution for the foreseeable future, with the possibility of release when she reaches a level of recovery where she no longer poses a danger to herself or others. As of now, it is unclear when or if Morgan will be allowed to leave the institution. Morgan's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of internet culture and the impact it can have on vulnerable youth. Her belief in Slender Man, combined with her mental illness, created a toxic mix that led to an unspeakable crime. This case underscores the importance of early intervention for mental health issues, especially in children, and the need for responsible internet use, particularly when it comes to online communities that promote harmful or dangerous ideas. The case of Morgan E. Geyser also reflects the complexity of mental health in young offenders. It forces us to consider how mental illness can shape the actions of youth and how society should approach these cases in a way that balances justice with treatment. While Morgan's crime was horrific, her story also highlights the need for compassion and understanding in dealing with young people who may be suffering from untreated mental health issues. Janine Gonzalez, a 17-year-old girl from Buffalo, New York, became involved in a brutal murder that shocked her community. Alongside her co-conspirator, Antonetta Stevens, Janine participated in the vicious killing of 30-year-old Ashley Bacanra, the mistress of her older brother. The crime was fueled by jealousy and betrayal, and it ultimately led to the tragic and senseless loss of life. Janine's involvement in the crime stemmed from a complicated mix of emotions, including resentment toward Ashley and an intense, albeit misguided loyalty to her brother. The nature of her relationship with Stevens, who was engaged to her brother, compounded the situation. The toxic dynamics between the women led to a deadly confrontation that would forever change their lives. The murder of Ashley Bacanra was not a crime of impulse, but one that was carefully planned and executed. The premeditated nature of the attack and the subsequent attempt to cover it up made the case even more disturbing. Janine's involvement raised serious questions about the vulnerability of young people in volatile relationships, especially when fueled by jealousy and manipulation. On the afternoon of August 11, 2024, Janine Gonzalez and Antonetta Stevens lured Ashley Bacanra to a residence in Gwinnett County, Georgia, under the pretense of reconciling with her. Ashley, unaware of the deadly trap awaiting her, arrived at the house and was immediately confronted by the two women. The confrontation quickly escalated into violence. and both Janine and Antonetta began assaulting Ashley. Antonetta led the physical attack, while Janine recorded the incident on her phone, capturing the brutality of the assault. The assault was not just physical, it was deeply personal. Antonetta and Janine blamed Ashley for her affair with Janine's brother and believed that she had wronged them. They planned to confront her, and when things took a violent turn, they showed no remorse for what they were doing. The attack was brutal. Ashley was beaten, dragged by her hair, and repeatedly assaulted. Despite her injuries, Ashley managed to escape into the street and seek help, but the damage had been done. She was severely injured and later succumbed to her wounds at the hospital. The two women, in an attempt to cover up their crime, stole Ashley's phone and left the scene, believing they had silenced her forever. The investigation into Ashley Bacanra's death moved quickly once authorities discovered her injuries and the involvement of Janine and Antonetta. Surveillance footage, along with witness statements, helped investigators piece together the timeline of events, revealing that the two women had meticulously planned the attack. The breakthrough in the case came from text messages and video footage recovered from Janine's phone. The messages between Janine and Antonetta clearly indicated their premeditation and intent to murder Ashley. The video footage, which Janine had recorded during the assault, provided a chilling window into the violence of the attack, showing the women's lack of remorse and the brutal nature of the crime. These pieces of evidence played a crucial role in Janine's arrest and the subsequent trial. Janine was arrested and charged with aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. Antonetta Stevens was also arrested and charged with similar offenses, and the case quickly became one of public interest due to the young ages of the perpetrators and the savage nature of the crime. The trial involved a complex legal process, with the defense arguing that Janine had been manipulated by Antonetta and that her youth and emotional state should be taken into account. In 2025, Janine Gonzalez pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and robbery by force as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after 17 years. Antonetta Stevens received an identical sentence after pleading guilty to the same charges. The case was a tragic reminder of how jealousy and emotional manipulation can escalate into violence, especially when young people are involved. Janine's role in the murder of Ashley Bacanra highlighted the destructive power of toxic relationships and the way unresolved conflict can build up to catastrophic consequences. It's clear that Janine's emotional attachment to her brother and her resentment toward Ashley contributed significantly to her participation in the crime. Reflecting on this case, it's apparent that early intervention in unhealthy relationships and emotional distress can prevent tragic outcomes. The power of jealousy, anger, and betrayal, combined with immaturity, proved to be a deadly combination. The case also emphasizes the need for better communication and support systems for young people, particularly those navigating complicated relationships, to help them resolve conflict in healthier ways. Janine Gonzalez's story is a tragic one, but it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangerous paths that unresolved emotional issues and toxic relationships can lead to. While Janine's conviction and sentencing reflect the severity of her actions, it's important to recognize the role of manipulation, immaturity, and the lack of positive guidance in her decision-making. In today's episode, we explored the chilling and heartbreaking stories of young individuals who became involved in some of the most tragic crimes. From Safa Bilar, a teenager driven by extremist ideology, to Morgan Geyser, whose delusion led her to attack her friend under the influence of internet mythology, each case revealed disturbing insights into the complexities of youthful violence. We also covered the tragic stories of Ashley Martinson, Maricela Diaz, and others, whose backgrounds of abuse, manipulation, and emotional turmoil fueled their involvement in violent acts. These cases not only shed light on the devastating consequences of young minds being exposed to unhealthy relationships, delusions, and trauma, but also raise important questions about how we address these issues as a society. Every story shared today highlights the emotional weight and pain behind each of these crimes. They remind us of the delicate and fragile nature of young minds, and how, when pushed to the brink, some may make decisions that lead to irreversible consequences. Which of these cases do you think could have been prevented? Was there a turning point that could have altered the path of these young individuals? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights. This is a conversation we must continue, as discussing the root causes of violence and early intervention is critical in preventing future tragedies. And if you've been impacted by these stories or simply want to raise awareness about these issues, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the conversation going. Next time, we'll get even deeper into darker cases, uncovering the disturbing motivations that pushed more young minds down tragic paths. These cases will leave you questioning what truly drives people to violence. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the intricate and often chilling stories behind the headlines. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next episode.